Sara Prestiani, who was supposed to speak today, had unfortunately a last-minute engagement, and I apologize also on her behalf for not being here today. My name is Elena Bizzi, and I work as migration coordinator at Euromed Rights. Just a few words on Euromed Rights. We are a network of around 60 civil society organizations, human rights defenders, activists, active in countries around the Euro-Mediterranean region, around the Mediterranean basin, and we work on different themes, migration and asylum, but also women's rights and gender justice, economic and social rights, accountability, justice and space for civil society, and democracy and freedom. As migration and asylum,
مش عارف هم يسمعوني ولا لا.
We work with our members to monitor and expose violations of fundamental rights at borders and in countries in the Euro-Mediterranean region. We're carrying out awareness-raising campaigns, we organize trainings, capacity building and networking activities with our members, and we carry out advocacy at the EU national and international levels. So we have been documenting and denouncing for many years now the increasing trend of externalization policies on migration from the EU and its member states to countries in North Africa and Middle East, and their consequent disastrous and harmful effects. In my intervention today, I will cover mainly the main challenges and problems related to EU externalization policies in the Mediterranean region, the possible resistance strategies from civil society organizations and human rights organizations, and provide some recommendations. So the EU and member states, since many years now, we can say from 2015, from the Valletta Summit and the creation of the EU Trust Fund for Africa, but even before that, have tried with all possible means to contain migration and prevent migrants and asylum seekers to reach the EU territory. For example, if we talk about money, funds, EU funds allocated to North African countries to stop migration, we have several examples. For Tunisia, for example, between 2015 and 2022, the EU has allocated between 93 and 178 million euro for migration issues, including and especially for strengthening and equipping the security forces to increase border controls. With the recently signed Memorandum of Understanding between the EU and Tunisia, the EU is planning to disburse up to 1 billion euro, of which 105 million is earmarked for, I cite, combating irregular migration. For Libya, another example, since 2017, the EU has disbursed 59 million euro for the project named Support for Integrated Border Management and Migration in Libya, which is implemented by the Italian Interior Ministry. And more recently, the Commission has also launched two new actions worth 10 million euro to support Libya's supposed maritime rescue coordination center and the training academy for border guards in Libya. For Egypt, for instance, in June 2022, the EU agreed to disburse at least 80 million euro to Egyptian Coast Guard to strengthen border controls and prevent departures. More recently, in July 2023, after the deal between the EU and Tunisia, the EU said that they are committed to strike other similar deals also with Egypt. Another example is Morocco. Under the EU Trust Fund for Africa, at least 179 million euro were disbursed for border management, while under the new financial instrument, the so-called NDICI, the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, since 2022, at least 220 million euro are allocated for migration cooperation, including to prevent irregular migration and fostering returns. Another very famous example is, of course, Turkey, with the 6 billion euro since the EU-Turkey deal. So the problem, of course, with this huge amount of money is the complete lack of transparency and accountability on the use of these funds. Complete lack of scrutiny from the European and national parliaments, no human rights impact assessment, and these funds actually go to the hands of authoritarian regimes, violent militias, and contribute to severe human rights violations. And we have seen very well in the past and also now how these funds and the external migration policies have been used and implemented in a so-called conditionality and blackmail approach. From the EU side, first of all, by conditioning, for example, the issuing of visas to the performance of countries in the MENA region on returns, readmissions, and border control. This has also a negative impact on the EU foreign policy. We should instead promote dialogue, development, and the respect of the rule of law and democratic processes. And this political approach can also be exploited by third countries who can use their borders as leverage against European countries to get additional funds or negotiate on other sensitive issues, geopolitics, ongoing conflicts, using the lives of migrants and refugees. We have seen this very well. We have several examples from countries such as Libya, Turkey, Morocco, Belarus, and Tunisia. Another very worrying aspect of this externalization trend is the increased use of the so-called safe third country and safe country of origin concept. This concept is in complete violation of the right of an individual assessment of asylum applications, as enshrined in the Refugee Convention and international law. But we see more and more how EU countries are relying on this dangerous concept to strike dirty deals and return people to countries where they could face serious persecutions and where their lives are at risk. For example, in the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, which is under negotiations now, each member state can decide the criteria to consider a country as safe, and there is not a new definition, but it's at the discretion of each member state. This is, of course, extremely dangerous, and the member state just needs to show a connection between the asylum seekers and the safe third country. And this connection can be a link with a family member, or if the person stayed or just transited through this country. So this will allow member states to conduct swift returns and refoulement just on the basis that the person transited through this third country. And as we all know very well, and as documented by numerous human rights and UN bodies, countries such as Tunisia and Libya clearly cannot be considered as safe countries, neither for their citizens nor for migrants and refugees. Another worrying trend from the EU is to increasingly support what they call search and rescue capacities of third countries. This is mentioned, for example, in the EU Pact on Migration and in the action plan on the Central Mediterranean presented by the European Commission in November 2022, where it is mentioned to reinforce search and rescue capacities of countries such as Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and to increase the role of Frontex in search and rescue activities in the central Mediterranean, which is very problematic given, of course, the controversial role of Frontex and the evidence of Frontex involvement in pushbacks in the central Mediterranean. And this is, of course, very worrying to call search and rescue operations by countries such as Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, because actually interceptions, violent interceptions and pullbacks at sea cannot be considered as search and rescue operations. So this reinforced capacity through funding, equipment and training of third countries, coast guards and border police has just increased the number of human rights violations against migrants and refugees, increased unlawful pushbacks and deaths at sea and land borders. One example of these cooperations is the infamous Italy-Libya Memorandum of Understanding signed in 2017, which led to more than 100,000 people being intercepted and brought back to Libya by fueling a vicious circle of violence and abuse. A second example is the memorandum between Malta and Libya in May 2020. And on Malta, it is interesting to note that Malta, despite having the biggest search and rescue zone in the Mediterranean, continues its omission of rescue strategy, leaving boats adrift, leaving people die at sea, and rescuing an insignificant number of people. For example, according to Alan Phone, in the first 6 months of this year, Malta only rescued 141 people. And a third example, of course, the most recent one is the memorandum between the EU and Tunisia, which aims at strengthening Tunisia's border control, as well as returning migrants and refugees to Tunisia from European Union countries. And while the EU was signing this memorandum in July, at least 1,200 men, women and children have been collectively expelled to the Tunisian, Libyan and Tunisian Algerian borders by Tunisian security forces without any due process and with reports of beatings and sexual assaults, and at least 27 people die at these borders in these collective expulsions. So in this scenario, we see that the humanitarian and human rights implications of this cooperation to contain migration has led to an unprecedented number of deaths and missing at sea, and to increase pushbacks and human rights violations. And not even to the desired outcome for the EU, which would be to reduce departures, because we've seen that the number of arrivals in Italy this year is twice as much as in 2022. According to the IOM Missing Migrants Project, more than 2,000 people died or gone missing in the central Mediterranean route in 2023, and 22,314 since 2014. Concerning specifically Tunisia, according to the Tunisian Ministry of Interior, 901 migrant bodies were recovered in the first 7 months of 2023, including 26 Tunisians, 267 non-Tunisians, and 608 unidentified bodies. Unfortunately, behind, of course, and these numbers are likely to be much higher, and behind these numbers, there are families, friends, brothers and sisters, and broken lives. Also, increased interceptions at sea and pushbacks are a consequence of these cooperations, with more than 35,143 people being intercepted by the Tunisian Maritime Guard and brought back to Tunisia in 2023, with violent practices during interception operations reported. So in this very bleak scenario, I think we need to work together as civil society organizations, local and international, to put in place resistance strategies and also to counter the continued shrinking civic space and criminalization of NGOs and human rights defenders. It is fundamental to monitor human rights violations and gather information on what is happening and to work collectively and cooperate as much as possible. Just to give you some examples, as Euromed writes, we are currently implementing a project on the use of artificial intelligence in border control technologies inside the EU and for the external dimension. And we published 2 reports that I can put in the chat later for your information, for your interest. And we produced a mapping of identification procedures of dead bodies and the search for missing in the Maghreb region. And we will soon publish a joint research on the use of EU funds under the NDICI, focusing on Libya and Tunisia. So we think it's important to combine advocacy actions at different levels, UN, EU, regional, national level, also with strategic litigation efforts, and also to work with media, journalists to increase awareness, produce awareness-raising campaigns, communication, and promote a correct narrative and communication on migration. To conclude, our recommendations focus on the importance of increasing and open new and effective legal pathways for migration and protection to Europe, including resettlement pledges and humanitarian visas, and the only way to avoid further loss of lives and violations. And we also call on the EU and member states to put in place a truly EU-led search and rescue operation in the Mediterranean to immediately halt any support on border management and migration control to countries such as Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt until human rights benchmarks are met, to increase transparency and accountability on the use of EU funds on migration, and to stop carrying out pushbacks and collective expulsions in violations of EU and international law. So I will stop here. I thank you very much for your attention. And please, if you have any questions or clarifications, if you can put them in the chat and I will reply. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Elena. شكرا إلينا. أنا أتشرف إن
Thank you very much, Elena, and I'm honored that today in our session in Ibn Salon, we'll be talking about, of course, the Arab-European cooperation in combating irregular migration and the fact that it is being, or whether is it being used as a tool for authoritarianism in the South Mediterranean. We'll discuss the different aspects, whether political, humanitarian, and human rights. And we'll talk about its impact on these regimes.
الاستمرار في ممارسات قمعية والأثر على
the repercussions that they have on migrants who are subject to these practices. Lina has explained the programs that are provided by the EU for the South Mediterranean countries, large sums of money that are taxpayers' money being used in a way that is not transparent to directly support regimes that lack internal accountability for countering irregular migration practices. These regimes are also fighting organizations, be it national or international, and they directly work with entities that commit severe violations in terms of search and rescue processes. Now we have an idea about programs, EU programs, and I'm glad that during this meeting we're going to have with us Ms. Amira Marcus, who is a Libyan activist and researcher on human rights, and Dr. Masoud Ramdani, who is a former member of the Executive Euro-Mediterranean Committee for Human Rights and Mr. Azzuddin Fashir, who is a writer, academic, and Egyptian diplomat, and a professor at the University of Dartmouth. Now I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Masoud Ramzani to tell us about the Tunisian perspective and how they perceive the bilateral agreements between South Mediterranean Arab countries and European states, and especially in the Tunisian context. Mr. Masoud, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, Mr. Masoud, go ahead. I'm sorry about the delay. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to briefly start by responding to the question about the title of this session. Does Arab-European cooperation in combating irregular migration serve as a tool for authoritarianism? Yes, it does support it, and it has given legitimacy to authoritarian regimes in the South Mediterranean, and this is for two reasons. Right now, migration to European countries is the key problem now, and especially the flow of migrants from Africa and Arab countries. This flow of migrants, as you know, is caused by civil unrest and civil instability in these countries. The second reason is the provocation of the blackmail that the South Mediterranean countries are carrying out. This is twofold. First of all, they want silence about violations of human rights in exchange for being gatekeepers for European borders. And the second thing is that they want legitimacy for being in power. This is because generally the economies are degrading. As you can see, Arab economies keep deteriorating, and part of the money and the funds that they receive from European countries help them to support their budgets and help them to purchase security equipment that would be used on the interior to manage their people and on the exterior to manage irregular migration. However, there were times historically regarding the relationship of Europe and the South Mediterranean, where there was a lot of concentration on human rights. For example, the Barcelona Treaty between the EU and 12 South Mediterranean countries, including Lebanon, Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, Palestine, etc., etc. And the second article in it had three pillars. The first one is fostering democracy and good governance and human rights. And this was very important, especially for the civil society, which had become trying to hold Europe accountable for their relationship with some dictators, such as Ben Ali, for instance. And in light of this, many organizations and human rights organizations were formed as a result of this article. Another phase was the phase of the so-called Arab Spring, when Europe was quick to create some agreements with some South Mediterranean countries based on democracy and human rights, at least on paper. For instance, there was an agreement between Tunisia and the EU that Morocco also joined in 2013, and it included, among other things, articles about sustaining democracy and good governance, etc. And the free trade agreement project between Tunisia and the EU included that civil society organizations must be present, and we as CSOs insisted that there needs to be articles about migration and irregular migration, and it needs to be founded on human rights and the respect of human rights. But unfortunately, that agreement did not see the light, and this is part of the past. And now Tunisia conducts its business with the EU without consulting civil society organizations. The problem now is that the Arab Spring soon turned into military coups, civil unrest, dictatorship, civil wars, etc., which has increased the number of migrants and asylum seekers. And African countries have lived through these military coups and other unfortunate events. At the same time, the population kept growing. It is expected that the population growth in Africa between 2010 and 2026 is expected to be 48.6% versus only 1% in Europe. So imagine that the percentage of youth in Africa exceeds 60%, which means that migrants are going to, number of migrants is going to increase, be it regular migrants or illegal migrants, irregular migrants, sorry. This has made the EU consider the Mediterranean as, sorry, so the EU considers the Mediterranean as an identity border where they only trade goods, but they need to limit the migration of individuals. So now, due to the significant flux of migration, there is talk that migration is harmful to the homogeneity, cultural and ethnic homogeneity of Europe. And now, as you know, the great exchange that they talk about, or the replacement, the so-called replacement, is replacing Europeans by other ethnicities, Arabs, Muslims, Berbers, Black people, etc., etc. There's a fear of this. Now, the crisis, financial and economic and other, that Europe has seen and has witnessed has affected the credibility of liberal and left parties. So that gave rise to rightist parties, which now are focusing on migration, which they believe to be the reason behind all of the crisis that Europe has suffered from. And now I'm going to talk about the reason why the EU cooperation regarding migration is a tool for authoritarianism. Now, amongst these right-wing parties, there are obstacles and restraints, which are essentially leftist parties, civil society organizations, especially when civil society organizations hold them accountable for deporting irregular migrations, on the difficult process of allocating asylum status to individuals who seek asylum, asylum seekers. You know now that they cannot deport minors and children. So for the time being, the authoritarian governments do not hesitate to sign agreements about migration in the South Mediterranean, and they are willing to play the role of gatekeeper for European borders in exchange for funds and in exchange for silence about human rights violations. I'll just give an example about the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed between the EU and Tunisia in the previous last June or July, which came under the following circumstances. At the internal level, there are no independent institutions, there is no independent parliament, and the civil society is not really active. And as you know, everyone knows this, and one of my colleagues mentioned this before me. You know that last February, the presidential speech of February 2023 was the same discourse of the European right wing. They considered that one of the main reasons why crime increased in Tunisia was irregular migration, and that the migration from sub-Saharan Africa is a conspiracy that targets Tunisia and its identity and its culture. And the parties in this conspiracy are in Tunisia and outside of Tunisia, and they have received funds to help support migrants in Tunisia. This made Ms. Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, to talk about the similarity in perspective between Tunisia and the EU, and she brought with her the Prime Minister of the Netherlands and other parties, and they agreed on 4 key points. First of all, preventing migrants from reaching EU borders. Second point is deporting migrants. And third point is preventing Tunisia from getting to a state of bankruptcy as a result of irregular migration. Before that, José Borrell spoke about Tunisia and how when it struggles on the social and economic level, people are going to leave and come to Europe. The fourth point was on the management of border protection in compliance with human rights, which we all know that is just a cover and is not a key point in this agreement. Tunisia started implementing the first 2 articles, that is, the return of Tunisian migrants deported by Europe, and the second point on the prevention of the arrival of irregular migrants to European borders.
يعني تحدثت يعني المفوض الأوروبي للعلاقات الخارجية أن
The European Commissioner spoke about Tunisia banning 24,000 irregular migrants.
كريم الوقت.
Sorry, do I still have time? Do I still have time?
احنا لو ممكن نعمل بس نقف وبعد كده يعني لو حضرتك عايز تكمل الفكرة وبعد كده
So maybe you can continue with this idea and then we move on to Q&A. I just have 2 points, and then if you want, we can come back to the discussion. This point is that Tunisia has prevented and deterred, according to the EU Parliament, has deterred 24,000 irregular migration boats from reaching Europe, which means Tunisia is serious about this. It's serious about stopping irregular migration. This is 3 times higher than last year. But regarding the point on the respect of human rights, we all know what happened to the migrants here, and all the human rights organizations spoke about these violations. You know that hundreds of migrants were taken to the Tunisian, Libyan, and Algerian borders, and many of them died of thirst and hunger at a time when the EU was discussing the memorandum of understanding. So I think that's all of my time. Let's move to the Q&A, but I shall continue later if we have time left. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Masoud. Of course, we are going to have time to talk about the points in detail. We had two questions. There was a question about Libya, and then maybe Elena, if she has a response for this, then we're going to move to the following speaker, and we'll discuss the funding and how the government use the fund.
لا تمتثل لسلطة موحدة حتى لو كانت قمعية، وده بيعزز ان يكون في انتهاكات اكتر بكتير. كان في سؤال هل يعتبر الاتحاد الاوروبي ليبيا دولة آمنة؟ وكان سؤال اخر بيسأل على كيفية ازاي الدولة الإيطالية مضت اتفاقات مع حكومة ليبية مع افتقادها للشرعية. النقطة الأولى لو إلينا عندك عليها تعليق سريع. So Elena has a question, if from the perspective of the United European Union, Libya it's a safe place, and then أميرة ممكن نتكلم أكتر، أكيد هتناقشي بالتفصيل الوضع في ليبيا وهتذكري يمكن إجابة على السؤال. Do you want Elena to answer quickly?
Yes, thanks, Karim. Sorry for the Arabic translation. I was a bit delayed. Yes, I answered in the chat. The EU and Italy, by providing, funding equipment, as we've seen before, to the Libyan Coast Guards, are actually contributing to the so-called pushbacks by proxy or pullbacks done by the Libyan Coast Guards. So they are contributing to forced returns to Libya. So they don't declare openly that they consider Libya as a safe country, but of course by providing all these funds and equipment, the EU is complicit in and has a responsibility in all these human rights violations and these forced returns and pushbacks by proxy and pullbacks to Libya.
شكرا جدا إلينا. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you very much, Elena. Now let me give the floor back to Amira. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for organizing this very important dialogue. First, I would like to express my condolences for the people who died in Libya because of
to start, I just wanted to give my condolences about the lives of people that were victims of the floods that took place in the east of Libya, and also the victims of the earthquake in Morocco. For our topic today, migration has long existed in the world, and every human has the right to move and choose where they settle. But unfortunately, when borders were set and when the system of visas was set, freedom of movement policies depended on the different countries. But since 9/11, 2001, the treatment changed and the restrictions on the freedom of movement have increased especially on countries of Africa and North Africa. And these restrictions are now legal. So today, the increasing numbers of irregular migration to Europe and other countries is a natural result of these restrictions because people are in a constant search for a better life and for decent living conditions. The more we decrease conditions and opportunities for people to move in a regular and legal way, the more they will find irregular and illegal opportunities to do so. What is not natural now is to make migration a political matter and preventing people of their freedom of movement and externalizing the migration policies so that European countries absolve themselves of the responsibility to provide proper treatment for migrants. Uh, Now, the majority of European embassies in Tunisia have announced this summer that they're not accepting visa requests, saying that they have reached the limit quota, but this is not the true cause. We have also seen that the recent events in Tunisia and the recent riots about migrants are a direct result of these migration policies. Now, unfortunately, our governments are working with EU governments on these restrictive agreements. And as we said, Tunisia has signed agreements worth millions with Europe in order to stop and return irregular migrants to Libya and Tunisia and prevent them from reaching Europe. So our governments are working as instruments for foreign governments whose priority is not our welfare and our well-being. Our governments are transitional governments and they already have problems and they face crisis. And so they are not capable of looking after irregular migrants and their people. So this has further exacerbated the problems that we suffer from in North Africa. We already have poor services, we already have poor budgets. And so when our governments return migrants from the sea to our countries, we are responsible for them, especially if they are put in detention centers. Our governments would be liable to provide for them healthcare and welfare in general, but the reality is different. Our governments are working for the benefit of European countries. They are returning migrants to our countries, but they are not looking after them. Sadly, the governments think that by accepting this aid, they are helping these. Sorry, could you please ask the speaker to speak slowly? It's impossible to follow the pace. The only thing they're doing is trainings to return irregular migrants from sea to North African countries and prevent them from reaching European borders. What we ask now is to stop these agreements and to listen to people like us, activists working in these areas, so that we can together establish working methods for the long term. If you want me to address the question now, or I can address it later. Yeah, go ahead. I just want to go back to the question about the agreement with the Italian government. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer to this very good question, but I'll say in short, the EU and Italy were smart. They found a loophole in the situation in Libya. Before things deteriorated, they knew that the situation would remain vulnerable from a political and security perspective, so they decided to provide money and funds to entities that will accept these agreements because they serve their own interests. They were smart because if Tunisia had an established government 10 years ago, I don't think it would have accepted such agreements, or at least they would have reviewed them. And we wish for this to happen right now. So I hope this answers your question. This is my point of view. If anyone else has anything to add, please feel free. Thank you, Amira. A quick comment about the question. Speaking of legitimacy and justifying legitimacy, the Italian executive said that the Tripoli government was approved by the UN, and so they benefited from the so-called legitimacy in order to serve their interests. We can move to talking about with Dr. Fashir, talking about the reason why the South Mediterranean is now repulsive to people who live in it and people who transit through it, and how the support that's given to authoritarian regimes in the region can be seen on the short term to further reinforce the reasons that prevent the South Mediterranean countries from overcoming their challenges and overthrowing their authoritarian regimes. This has created a vicious cycle where the South Mediterranean has become an unlivable region for both its own nationals and those who transit through it. Thank you very much for organizing this discussion. To begin, I'm going to answer the question as Mr. Masoud did on whether the Arab-European cooperation in combating irregular migration is a tool for authoritarianism. The answer is, of course, yes. But I'm going to rectify. I'm going to say it's not only a tool that serves authoritarianism, it serves the governments and the regimes in the South Mediterranean, regardless of their nature. I'm going to briefly explain what I mean. The second point, to answer your question, Karim, I disagree with you. I don't think that the European aid for the dictator regimes, Arab regimes, help to further exacerbate the economic and social and financial failure, which increases pressures on migration. I disagree with this. I think the reasons why tens of thousands of people try to migrate to Europe, legally or illegally, these reasons are specific to us, to the Arab region. It has nothing to do with the EU or how they spend their foreign support budgets or their interests. It has nothing to do with what happens outside of the Arab world. It has to do with what happens in the Arab world. People here in Egypt who risk their lives and the lives of their children and they get on boats, or those who come from Asia and they cross all these distances to get to Turkey and they risk their lives to get on the boat that may or may not arrive to destination. They're not going there for a specific European country. They're going there to find a better life. Why have they lost hope so much? They've lost hope that they will find a decent life in their country. The reason why we are so desperate is specific to us. So I don't think we should blame the EU for this. There are so many things for which we can blame the EU, but this is not one of them. This should not be surprising. And so, of course, cooperation on irregular migration will become a tool for authoritarianism. First of all, one of the main roles that the Arab regimes have given to themselves and not given to them by the EU is to contain extremists in their societies. Sometimes it's national extremists, sometimes it's other forms, but now it's migration. These regimes are always threatening the outside world that if they don't support them, then they're going to send waves of extremists to them who are going to drown them in Islamist or nationalist extremism. This is old news. The new excuse is migration, but this is old news. This is because many Arab regimes believe that the regimes are sane, are rational, and they are governing insane and irrational people. And if they were to release them, they're going to devour the world. And so it's not just the Islamists that were a threat. People in general are used as a threat to the EU countries. And they have been used as a threat since the Arab countries emerged. So, like I said, this is old news. The second point is the legal side. The natural expectation from a state, there is a legal commitment that each country needs to safeguard and gatekeep its own borders. We're not other people's protectors. Each country is accountable for the protection of its borders with its neighbors. Of course, asylum is a different question, but if a state cannot control its domain, that's state failure, that's something else. But there is a legal commitment for each country to protect its borders. So we as Arab countries have this expectation with our neighboring countries. So the governments and the heads of the governments don't need to be racist, like, for example, Qais Said. Countries like Mexico, for example, where hundreds of thousands of people cross to the American border without visas, etc. It makes the borders problematic. Think of it this way: what if Americans and Canadians did the same? There would be problems between them on their borders. So, like I said, the second point is that Arab countries must have a legal commitment to protect their borders, and it's natural that its neighbors ask them to enforce this commitment. The third point is that the European regimes are elected regimes, and so each prime minister will be keeping an eye on surveys of opinions and on their position and on how their opponents are going to use things against them. Any official, any elect official in the EU is going to be punished if they neglect something that the majority see as a problem, including migration issues. Now, in the EU, we know there's a lot of discrimination and racism, and there's a lot of rejection to foreigners. And so the opponents would naturally, and the people would naturally make the issue of migration a key topic. And so, like I said, it's not about authoritarianism, it's about state needs. The second point is that Arab countries and Middle Eastern countries in general, in their relation to EU countries, are always on the side of demanding and asking. I don't want to say upper hand and lower hand, but we are always asking them more than they ask us. They do need Arab countries, but the truth is that Arab countries refer to them more and ask them for more. And so, if you think of it this way, European countries can't respond to all of the requests. We ask them for 20 things per year. They ask us for 5 things per year. And so Arab countries and MENA countries, as soon as they find a tool or leverage for pressure, they use it, regardless of what that tool is. So the issue of migration was a very easy tool because it directly has an impact on the legitimacy of European governments and their prospects for winning elections. So they've used it. So the next key point is that we're not talking about authoritarianism now. Now, Erdogan is elect, but without the authoritarianism, he can use the issue of migration to put pressure, and he has used it. We can say that there is a democratic regime in Tunisia or in Libya or in Egypt. They would still use migration in the same way. This is because it's an easy and effective way, because when we are negotiating with an EU counterpart, we have more requests than they do. So of course we're going to use any tool for pressure. We are institutionally, economically, and socially and politically weak entities, and this weakness has kept us in a position where we're always asking things from the EU. Because we're always asking, we need tools, we need any tools. We try to find things, and when we fail, we resort to anything that may work. Now, the key reason as to why the countries are weak is the deterioration of their systems, economic, cultural, financial, etc., which are the main reasons behind migration. To talk about what my colleague said, we're not talking about regular visas where people are going to go to work and come back, to study and come back, for tourism and come back. We're talking about people who are leaving their countries behind and wanting to move and settle and stay in other countries. Now, the host countries are not obliged to welcome these people who are the result of the failure of other countries. Now, here, if half of our people want to go live in the EU, that doesn't make the EU obligated to welcome them and be responsible for them. There are people. So the problem is the weakness of systems in our countries that create unusual pressures that cause people to migrate. So to sum up, of course, it makes sense that migration would be used from a political perspective as a result of the historic context and the pressures and the constant need of South Mediterranean Arab countries for the support of European countries. The second point is that the problem is not a problem of dictatorships and authoritarian regimes, but it's a problem of failure. Unless this failure is addressed, the migration will continue and it will continue to be used as a political tool. So to conclude, this topic, unfortunately, as tragic as it may be, this is a public tragedy that has an impact on everyone almost. But unfortunately, this will continue for a long time. All the indicators suggest that this is going to be a fixed aspect of the relations between European countries and MENA countries, especially after we've seen the tragic context and the tragic situation in Libya. We know that the country is very poor and the country is very fragile and it can't contain and deal with these challenges, which further exacerbates the challenges. At the same time, European governments are trying to go outside of their usual frameworks to manage this, and this is going to, like 20 years ago, when they created the extradition agreements on giving terrorist suspects to MENA countries to interrogate. They're going to do the same thing now. They're going to give the people back for South Mediterranean and MENA countries for them to deal with them. So this situation is going to continue. It will continue to be a part of the relations, and we need to think of how we are going to deal with this based on this.
ممكن نفتح الباب للأسئلة.
Can we open the floor for Q&A?
في أستاذ حسن.
Mr. Hassan?
اتفضل أستاذ حسن.
شكرا أستاذ كريم، وشكرا لكل الحاضرين على مداخلاتكم.
Thank you, Mr. Karim, and thank you all for your interventions. I would like to add something to what Mrs. Asma has said. It's more a comment than a question. So concerning the context of migration in Libya, it's a very complicated context. And even the new Libyan authorities after the February Revolution, they still are adopting the same policies as those of Mr. Gaddafi before. Up until now, where both Eastern and the Western areas in Libya are handling the topic of migration in Libya as a political, of course, as a political tool that they can use and exploit, whether for political, for any gains. Actually, they could have or support. I would not get into details on the Libyan migration policies. This is a very complicated topic and we have experts here, but I'd like to talk about what happened between May and the end of June. For instance, we have noticed that there were visits exchanged between Libya and Malta. They have met General Haftar in Libya. Also, the Italian foreign minister has visited Rajma, and they have after that General Haftar has reciprocated and visited Italy, and has visited the Ministry of Defense and the Minister of Interior in Libya, and they did sign a number of undeclared agreements. And I believe that the same thing has happened with the Government of National Unity, as there were exchanged visits between the Libyan and Italian authorities. The topic of migration has always been at the top priority of these governments, and these meetings, these official meetings between Libya and the other countries. After these visits by Haftar and the head of the Government of National Unity in Libya, we have seen a huge campaign concerning against asylum seekers and refugees in Libya. There were many attempts, many acts of violations, arrests, coerciveness, especially in Tobruk, where more about 10,000 people or refugees or migrants were arrested. That is not to mention also the migrants that were expelled from Libyan lands through the borders, whether between Libya and Tunisia or Libya and Egypt. These people expelled from the country on barefoot, of course, they had children with them, and so this is what happened, and it showed that this was an attempt to show Europe and Italy specifically that they have the ability, that they are capable in just 2 days to arrest 10,000 people, and that they could send back more than 2,000 Libyan citizens back to Egypt within 2 days without any proper arrangements. In this same context, as we can see in the Libyan eastern south, in the Kofra area between Libya, Sudan, and Chad, we can see that there are regular deportation events, especially to people coming from from Eastern Africa, such as Eritrea and Sudan, and Ethiopia, and Somalia. So these deportations, they happen without any specific procedures, without going through the proper authorities, and they actually do not look into the documents or to see whether this person is this person an asylum seeker, is this an irregular migrant, or a worker here. So what they do is that they just arrest them, they put them in detention center in Kufra, and then they deport them. And on many occasions, they just left in very small towns, border towns between Libya and Sudan. Now, when we look into the western area, we see also that there are regular arrest campaigns, and actually, we started to see that the Libyan Coast Guard getting into international waters, and they try to arrest, they try to steer away the boats, and those are efforts to please their finders, of course, the people who are affording the funding, that is European countries such as Italy. In Libya, we have that the Department of Countering Migration that is totally funded by European countries, especially Italy. And currently, the High Commission on refugees is facing dire circumstances and a lot of pressure, and there is a sit-in front of the headquarters of the Commission, and they're showing that the people are protecting the headquarters of the Commission. We see in videos the other people going there, they're trying to take pictures to document, and they show that the cars, the people providing the protection to the Commission on to this commission. And we believe that the same thing that happened in October 2021 could happen again when events such as deportation, inhuman deportation, especially in difficult circumstances, could happen again. We expect such thing to happen. Thank you for listening.
شكرا جدا حسن. هل في
Thank you very much,
أسئلة؟
Hassan. Are there any other
لو
questions?
الزملاء المتحدثين يحبوا
Also, let's check if the speakers would like to answer or comment on what Hassan said.
يستفيدوا على نقاط ما قدروش
Or maybe they could like to clarify some points that they have mentioned in their interventions. The floor is open. Karim, I could answer a few questions that I see in the chat. Most of the questions are concerning Libya, so maybe in one just a statement I could answer most of them. Thank you. Yes, that would be great. Now, concerning the question about the LGBT community in Tunisia and Libya and whether they can get protection by applying for humanitarian visas, I believe in Libya the situation is very difficult and they don't get the opportunity to apply for such visas because they're in their own country, especially for Libyans, because they're in their own countries. Maybe they could go through Tunisia and through Tunisian organized CSOs they could apply for such visas. This is an answer to the first question. Now, concerning the powers allocated to CSOs to have access to the agreements signed between the EU countries and Libya or Tunisia. Actually, we cannot do that because, unfortunately, these agreements are not declared and sometimes they get leaks that are followed by of course campaigns and then we act around it and the society organizations they organize activities around that but it seems that it's pretty much the same thing, it's the same agreement ever as my colleague said ever since the Gaddafi regime. It's pretty much the same policies. It's such agreements are usually surrounding in mystery. They officials they do not talk about them openly. The content is not shared with the public, which is something that we hope that we can change in the near future, and we hope that we can add our proposals or have something to say, especially in future agreements that they could sign. Now, as to the role that the EU could play concerning repatriation of refugees in Libya, I believe that the repatriation is a very complicated issue, and currently there's almost no room for repatriation except through certain mechanisms, such as any person who tries to cross the sea borders to Europe, these people could be exploited. And Libya and Tunisia are now playing a role in actually keeping migrants in North Africa, but there are no other mechanisms. Many foreign entities have tried to establish mechanisms and the laws for example, taking a license, asylum seekers, and so on and so forth. They wanted to provide basic rights at least for the people stranded in North Africa, but unfortunately, our countries have been refusing this so far. The other question on Libya. I believe that we will see the reaction of the EU concerning the latest crisis and whether they will actually accept the people into the EU or not, or whether we'll see actually more constraints and more limitation on the possibility on the availability of regular migration, leading more and more people to irregular migration. Especially now, we can see in Libya, whole cities and have been destroyed, and many people will find themselves forced to cross the Mediterranean illegally to Europe, and just hope that they stay safe. I believe that by this I covered all of the questions that were not answered. If there's anything else you can tell me. Karim, can I get the work? I have the floor quickly. Yes. Thank you, Amira, very much. Concerning the LGBT community in Tunisia, also we have been seeing a lot of complications, threats that were not expressed previously. We can see more and more threats against LGBTQ communities. We still have the laws, but unfortunately, the stigma is still there, and it is linked to the current political situation. So here we have a major difficulty, even for the civil society organization to work with them. What I would like to add also is that despite the complications, despite the authoritarianism in the south of the Mediterranean, still the effect of we can see more and more people migrating to Europe, and the Minister of for Interior of Italy lately has mentioned that this year they had the migration has doubled, and unfortunately also the people who lost their lives on the way, their number has doubled by 4 times. So people we see people trying to cross the Mediterranean on boats that have 3 times the capacity. And I talked to many students who said that if they get the chance, even by 10%, the chance even by the 10% to get to Europe, they said that they're willing to take it. They're willing to take the risk to die in the sea if there's a 10% opportunity or chance to get to Europe because they feel they're already dead in their countries. And this is something that we need to take into consideration. This desperation needs to be understood. Another thing that there in the report by the World Bank that expects that by 2050 migration in Africa will reach 86 million migrants from from Africa to Europe, and this migration will be driven only by climate change and not other factors, which is something that we need to take into consideration. We did not talk about, of course, the context on the Arab countries. Only 2 minutes, if you allow me. In 2016, the Economist magazine mentioned a very important dichotomy in the Arab world, as it says that a report called Youth in the Arab World Looking Forward in Erga. The report says that the countries that are calling for development from the youth is an important and essential element for development. This is usually the case, except for the Arab world. The youth are considered as not a source of power, but rather a source of trouble. Something else that we have here in Tunisia and in Egypt and in many other Arab countries, which is that in other countries, people who have higher degrees and skills, they have the possibility they get more opportunity for work offers. Except in our region, that the more qualifications and degrees you have, the lesser of a chance you have to for work opportunity. In Tunisia, 2/3 of unemployed people are college graduates. The third point is that even if you have a job in the Arab countries, then the context and so the way that promotion development is not really linked to or to skills and competencies, but rather relations and adhering to the authorities. This has really made the situation rather more difficult in their countries, and these are all push factors for people, Arab youth. Tunisia, 90% of medical students and doctors, they migrate to other countries. This also includes engineers. We are bleeding young qualified people, and this is a major issue for the Arab world.
شكرا جدا يا أستاذ مسعود. هل
Thank
السؤال
you very much,
الأخير
Mr. Masoud.
تعمل مداخلة أخيرة؟
Mr. Ahadstein, would you like to take the floor for last time? No, thank you.
شكرا جدا ليكم.
Thank
إحنا
you
عندنا
very
بعض
much.
الأسئلة اللي موجودة
We
على
have a few
يمكن
questions on
أخذنا
the
رأيكم
chat
ونحن
box,
نحاول نرد
and in
عليها
the interest of time, we will try to answer these questions in
أنا
writing.
بشكركم جدا على
I'd like to thank you very much for your
الحلقة
participation
من
in
حلقات
this session. I hope to see you soon in future events and in future sessions. Thank you all very much.